All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Definitely. Always ready to explore some fascinating ideas.
And today we're tackling a real classic, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Ah, yes. A book that's practically a cornerstone of personal finance. It's amazing how much it's still talked about.
It really is.
Yeah.
So many people have read it, but I feel like there's always more to uncover beneath the surface. Like
Yeah.
we're going to dig into those core principles.
Exactly. And really see how they apply, in today's world and how they can actually impact your own journey toward financial freedom.
Yeah, because there's so much more to it than just those few sound bites you always hear about.
Right. It goes way deeper than that.
Like, for example, think about your house.
Oh, yeah.
Is it really an asset?
That's the question Rich Dad, Poor Dad really throws at you, right? And it makes you rethink a lot of these assumptions we have about wealth.
Totally. And it all starts with this whole idea of the two dads, right?
It's a
And
brilliant setup.
Kiyosaki's own dad, the
Yeah.
poor dad. Super educated, but struggled with money his whole life.
Yeah, that contrast is really striking. You have the poor dad who followed that traditional path we're all told to follow. Get good grades, go to college, get a secure job.
Right, the safe route.
And yet he was always facing financial difficulties. It's like, wait a minute, something's not adding up here.
And then there's his friend's dad, the rich dad, who didn't even finish high school.
Right, but he builds this, this whole business empire.
Totally. So it makes you question, okay, what's the real path to success here?
It really exposes you to the idea that there isn't just one way, and that's what makes the book so compelling.
And it's so interesting how Kiyosaki talks about, learning from rich dad from such a young age, right?
Oh, yeah, working for him, what was it, for pennies an hour.
Yeah. I mean, collecting toothpaste tubes, setting up a comic book library.
Yeah.
Not your average chores.
Right. It's like, what kind of lessons are these? But they were actually, really carefully thought out. Rich Dad was teaching him about business and cash flow, spotting opportunities. And that leads right into his lesson number one, really, which is work to learn, don't just work for the money.
Which is completely different from what we're usually told, right? Go to school, get a good job, work hard, and, climb that ladder.
Yeah, and Rich Dad's like, hold on, flip that script, understand the value of financial education, learn the rules of the game.
The rules of the game, exactly.
Before you just jump into the rat race.
Oh, and that's another big one, right?
Ooh, the rat race, yeah. That cycle where you're just working, you're spending it on liabilities, and you're just stuck chasing that paycheck.
It's a trap.
And this book is all about how do you break free from that?
Okay, so now we got to talk about probably the most well-known, maybe even infamous concept from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, assets versus liabilities. It's the core of the whole thing.
It really is. And the way Rich Dad breaks it down is so simple. It's like assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out.
Yeah. Seems pretty straightforward.
You think, okay, I get it, but then he throws this curveball at you, right? Like your house, that thing you probably consider your biggest asset,
I know, right?
might actually be a liability.
That one really blew my mind when I first read it because, yeah, we're always taught, our home is an investment. It's going to go up in value.
You're building equity.
But then you realize, wait a minute, there's the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, all the maintenance, and all the repairs that always seem to pop up.
Right, and all that stuff is taking money out of your pocket every month.
It's a constant drain.
Exactly. And that's where, Rich Dad, Poor Dad really encourages you to think critically about, what are you spending your money on? Is this actually appreciating, or is this a liability that's weighing you down?
And it's not just about a house. It's everything.
Yeah, it applies to cars and all the gadgets we buy, all that stuff that just depreciates.
So how do we actually escape that rat race and start building real wealth?
Well, Rich Dad really emphasizes this idea of minding your own business.
Okay, and what does that even mean? Because it doesn't necessarily mean quitting your job and starting a company tomorrow, right?
Right. It's more about shifting your focus to building that asset column.
Right.
Creating multiple streams of income that don't depend on you trading your time for money.
Multiple streams of income, got it.
And he uses this great example, Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's. You think McDonald's, you think fast food.
Really? Hamburgers.
But what was Ray Kroc really in the business of?
So that's a good question.
Real estate. He understood that the real value was in the land, in the location of those franchises.
Oh, that's smart.
That was the asset. That's what built long-term wealth, not the burgers themselves.
So it's thinking beyond the obvious.
Yeah. and recognizing what are the underlying assets that are really driving the wealth.
Okay, so for everyone listening right now, think about this. How can you start minding your own business?
That's the challenge.
Like even today, what small steps can you take to start generating income that's not just coming from your paycheck?
It's about getting creative.
Exactly. You know what really got me thinking in Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
What's that?
It's how Kiyosaki dives into the whole history of money and taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds kind of dry, I know, but it's actually super fascinating.
It is.
And like it's important to understanding how the wealthy, kind of play the game differently.
Absolutely. You got to understand the rules. Like Kiyosaki argues that, if you really want to master finance, you need to see how those rules have changed over time. He talks about how, like, initially taxes were a way to keep the wealthy in check.
Right, to kind of even the playing field.
Up there.
The government realized, oh, wait a minute, we can get way more money if we tax the middle class.
Yeah.
And it's like the very people who voted for it,
Yeah.
thinking it was going to only affect the rich.
Right? It's like, oh, this is going to come back to bite us.
It's wild.
It really highlights how economic policies can, have unintended consequences.
Totally.
So you got to understand the system, be financially literate. You don't want to just be blindly following the rules. You got to play the game strategically.
Strategically, okay.
Yeah, and that's where his discussion of corporations comes in,
Right.
He talks about how the wealthy use corporations to, legally reduce their tax burden.
Right.
Like he even says, a corporation is not really a thing. It's just a file folder with some legal documents in it.
Oh, I remember that.
It's about understanding the legal structures that can protect your assets and minimize your taxes.
So it's not about like doing anything illegal.
No, not at all. He's not advocating for tax evasion or anything. It's more about understanding the rules and using them to your advantage, just like the wealthy do.
Leveling the playing field.
Exactly. And this isn't just for millionaires either. He's really encouraging everyone to explore these tools, like incorporating, especially if you're building a business or investing in real estate.
Okay, so it's about, playing smart. But it all comes back to that financial education, right?
Yeah.
Something Rich Dad keeps hammering on because traditional school doesn't really teach us this stuff.
No, it's more about getting a job than like building wealth.
Yeah, and that's where this whole idea of the rich invent money comes in, which, I got to be honest, sounded a bit like, is this some kind of magic trick?
It's a catchy phrase, right?
It is, but it's not about like a get-rich-quick scheme or anything.
Yeah, no magic formula.
Okay, good. I was worried there for a second.
It's more about seeing those opportunities that others might miss and understanding how to use your resources creatively to create wealth. He shares some pretty amazing examples from his own life, like, remember that story about how he bought houses at foreclosure auctions?
Oh, yeah, for like pennies on the dollar.
Exactly. He didn't have tons of cash sitting around, so he had to get creative with the financing. He understood the process, he knew how to spot those undervalued properties, and he wasn't afraid to take a risk.
A calculated risk, though.
Right.
Good.
It's not about just blindly jumping into things. And he wasn't just buying any house at auction.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, he was strategic. Like, there's that story about how he bought this dilapidated house, not for the house itself, but for the 4 empty lots that came with it. He tore the house down, sold the lots to a developer, and made a hefty profit without ever, having to renovate a thing.
Wow, that's clever.
It's about vision, right? Resourcefulness,
Yeah.
and seeing value where other people don't.
Seeing the potential.
Exactly. It's like using your financial intelligence to create opportunities instead of just waiting for them to come to you.
Okay, I like that.
Wow.
But I'm sure some people listening are like, well, that's easy for Robert Kiyosaki to say he's, a financial expert.
Yeah, but his point is anyone can develop this way of thinking.
It's a mindset.
Yeah. It starts with education, understanding those fundamentals of finance and then putting those principles into action. He also talks about building a team of advisors, people who are smarter than you in specific areas.
Oh, yeah, like specialists.
Yeah, whether it's real estate or stocks or, running a business. Having that expert guidance can really amplify your financial intelligence and prevent you from making those costly mistakes.
So you don't have to be an expert in everything.
No, not at all. But you do need to know who to ask for help.
It's like having a financial dream team.
Right. And here's an interesting tip. Kiyosaki believes one of the best ways to learn is to actually teach.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. When you teach someone else a concept, it forces you to really understand it, right?
Good dad.
And plus, it expands your network, it opens up new opportunities, and it often leads to these, like, unexpected rewards. You never know who you might connect with or what doors might open just by sharing what you know.
It's like the give and you shall receive, but with financial education. So, to everyone listening, the takeaway here is that the path to financial freedom, it's not about luck. It's not about winning the lottery.
No, it's about taking control.
It's paved with education and action and, getting out of that comfort zone.
Absolutely. It's about challenging that conventional wisdom about money, honing your financial intelligence, and ultimately creating a life where you control your finances rather than them controlling you.
And don't be afraid to start small.
Yeah, start small, make mistakes, keep learning, and keep growing.
Because Rich Dad, Poor Dad is really a call to action. It's a roadmap, but you got to be willing to take the wheel.
You got to drive.
All right, so we've talked about the big ideas in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but what about the actual, putting it into practice? What can people actually do?
Right, because it's full of practical advice you can use right now. Like, spoiler alert, it's not about waiting for a big windfall or hitting the jackpot.
Yeah, no magic solutions here.
It's about taking control of your money and making choices. And, having the discipline to actually stick with it, even when, things get tough.
And one of those pieces of advice that really stuck with me is this idea of pay yourself first. It sounds so simple, but it's like a total game changer. How does that actually work?
Okay, so pay yourself first means setting aside some of your income for savings and investments before you pay any bills or buy anything else for yourself. It's about prioritizing your future self,
Oh, okay.
You're making a commitment to your financial well-being before anything else. Instead of saving whatever's left over at the end of the month, you're treating your savings as like a non-negotiable expense.
I see. Flipping the script.
Exactly. And that's a fundamental principle of building wealth, and it takes a shift in mindset, right? It's about being dedicated to those long-term financial goals, even when those short-term wants are, calling your name.
Tempting you.
Yeah.
Because, let's be real, there are times when money is tight, when you're just, barely making ends meet. What does Rich Dad say to do then?
He says you still pay yourself first. Even if it's a tiny amount, $5, $10, the act of setting that money aside, even a little bit, sends this powerful message, It's like you're telling yourself, hey, my financial future matters.
It's like a symbolic act.
And as you get better at managing your money and your income grows, you can increase that amount. It's about establishing that habit.
Make it automatic.
Yeah. Another piece of advice that I found really valuable was finding mentors, people who've already achieved what you're aiming for, right?
People who've been there, done that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking about reading books or watching videos. It's about actively seeking those mentors out in real life, building relationships, and learning from their experience firsthand.
Because think about it. A good mentor can save you so much time and energy. They've already faced those challenges. They can offer advice, warn you about pitfalls. They might even open doors for you, connect you with opportunities that you never would have found on your own.
Absolutely. It's like having a shortcut. He also talks about this concept of being an Indian giver, which I gotta admit, the first time I read that, I was kind of like, wait, what?
Yeah, that one threw me off too.
But it's actually about this power of reciprocity, like being willing to give first.
Okay.
Offer value to others without expecting anything in return. Whether it's your time, your knowledge, or even your money, he found that when he gave generously, it always came back to him tenfold.
Oh, interesting.
It's like the more you give, the more you get. And it's not just about material wealth. It's about building relationships, a support network, attracting abundance.
I like that. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I think it's important to acknowledge that, some of Kiyosaki's specific advice might feel a little dated.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world, right?
Times have changed.
He's been criticized for, simplifying some financial concepts. And not all of his investment strategies are going to be right for everyone.
Right. But, the core principles of the book, they're still incredibly relevant.
They're timeless.
Yeah, it's about shifting how we think about money, questioning assumptions.
Taking control.
Exactly.
So, as you go on your own financial journey, remember those key lessons. Educate yourself, take action, be persistent, build your team, and never stop learning.
Keep growing.
And never forget, financial freedom is about having those choices, those opportunities, the time to live the life you really want. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
It's been a great discussion.
Now is your turn. What's the first step you're going to take on your road to financial freedom?